On January 17, 1977, a 36-year-old man named Gary Gilmore walked toward an abandoned canned food factory in Draper, Utah. Gary wasn't there to work. He wasn't there to visit anyone. He was there to die. Gary was a convicted murderer who had been sentenced to death just a few months earlier. His case had become a national story because the death penalty had been largely dormant in America for years. And now the country was preparing to witness one of the first executions in decades. After the sentencing, Gary's mother, along with attorneys and civil rights advocates, including the American Civil Liberties Union, fought desperately to have his sentence reduced to life in prison. But there was one problem. Gary himself didn't want that. He refused to cooperate with any efforts to delay the execution. In fact, he repeatedly pushed for it to move forward while everyone around him was trying to save his life. Gary seemed determined to bring it to an end. As he entered the abandoned factory that cold January morning, guards surrounded him on all sides. They were concerned he might make a last-second escape attempt, but Gary wasn't planning to run. Instead, he quietly took in the scene before him. The factory was empty, massive, silent. The machinery that once filled the building was gone, leaving behind a huge, cavernous room. Near the back wall sat a single chair. Nothing else, just one chair waiting in the middle of that enormous space. Gary knew exactly what it was for. When he reached it, he sat down without hesitation. The guard stepped forward and began fastening leather straps around his wrists, his ankles, and waist. They worked carefully, methodically, and secured him in position. Gary offered no resistance. Across the room hung a large curtain. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but Gary noticed 5 evenly spaced openings cut into that fabric. He couldn't see through them, but he knew exactly what was behind them. 5 police officers, 5 rifles. It was the firing squad, a method of execution that Gary himself had specifically requested. The room remained silent as a chaplain approached and performed Gary's last rites. When he finished, the chaplain leaned closer and asked a traditional question: "Do you have any final words?" Gary looked up. There was no speech, no apology, no emotional farewell. Just 3 simple words. "Let's do it." The chaplain stepped away. The signal was given, and the rifles emerged through the openings in the curtain. A moment later, 5 shots echoed through the factory. Within minutes, Gary Gilmore was dead. The execution dominated headlines across America. People debated the morality of it. News programs analyzed every detail. Newspapers covered it extensively. And then, as happens with most major news stories, time moved on. Years passed, people forgot, but one man remembered. 10 years later, in 1987, a marketing executive named Dan Wyden sat inside a conference room in Portland, Oregon. Dan co-owned a small advertising agency. His team had recently landed a client that they believed had enormous potential. The problem was that nobody could agree on how to market them. For hours, the team brainstormed, ideas were written down, ideas were crossed out, slogans were proposed and rejected. Nothing felt powerful enough. Nothing felt memorable. The client needed something simple, something bold, something people would never forget. And as the meeting dragged on, Dan's mind wandered, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he suddenly found himself thinking about Gary Gilmore. Specifically, he remembered the story of the execution he had followed a decade earlier. Then he remembered those final words, 3 words that had shocked the nation. "Let's do it." The phrase stuck in his mind. It was direct, confident, action-oriented. The more he thought about it, the more he felt it could be transformed into something bigger. So he made a tiny adjustment on one word. Instead of "let's do it," he just changed it to "just do it." 3 simple words that became the centerpiece of the campaign. At the time, nobody in the room could have predicted what would happen next. The slogan resonated instantly. Consumers loved it, sales exploded. The campaign became one of the most successful advertising campaigns ever created. It helped transform a growing athletic company into a global powerhouse, and decades later, those three words are still recognized in nearly every corner of the world. The company Dan Wieden was working for was his advertising agency, Wieden and Kennedy, and that client, Nike. And the famous slogan, "Just Do It," arguably the most recognizable advertising slogan in history, can trace its roots back into the original words spoken by a man facing a firing squad in an abandoned factory in Utah. A dark and tragic moment that somehow became one of the most successful marketing ideas ever created. You know what, guys? Just do it. Go ahead, like, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. That's right. Just do it.